Aloha and good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sharon Suzuki. I'm president of Maui County and Hawaii Island Utilities for Hawaiian Electric. We really appreciate you joining us tonight and making the time and commitment because we really want this to be more of a continuation of a discussion on getting to 100% renewables. What will it look like for Maui County? We know that we can't do it alone. We need to all work together to make it a reality. And we really understand that before we put together our plans, we're in the early stages of a long-range planning process that we call integrated grid planning. And you'll hear more about it later, but we know that it's very important to get the community's input, to understand your values, what are your concerns, before we put together the plan and do our economic analysis. So tonight, we've put together a panel that will share information about the topic from their varying perspectives. And we'll also show you a video of the community forum that we held on the same topic to start the discussion. So please listen, learn, provide us your input, and ask questions, because we really want to hear from you. So thank you again for attending. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening. It's Mahina Martin, our Director of Government and Community Affairs at Hawaiian Electric, based here in Maui County. Mahina.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. We've got a great lineup. We're going to move through tonight. And for those of you who are on our Facebook Live joining us, and those of you who are watching at a later date on Akaku, mahalo to both Akaku and our community, both here in person as well as on Facebook, for joining us tonight. Just some housekeeping items before we begin. If you have a cell phone, please check that it is on silent. If you must take a call, we ask that you leave the room and take your call outside of the building so as not to disrupt the discussion going on here. Our restrooms, if you have a need to know, is right outside the door I'm pointing at, the double door, brown doors. Turn left and you'll see it right in the hallway. I ask that you help yourself to refreshments throughout the night. There's plenty here. If you miss the brownies, please go check out the brownies. They're very good. And we appreciate the catering from Pukalani Superette, who, by the way, deliver. So yay for local business. Tonight, you must have gotten a survey form. We really would appreciate the time and thought that you can put into that, and certainly turn it in to us before the evening is done. You'll also notice you can mail it in later. We're very, very interested in some input that way. And finally, our open house segment of tonight will stay up. So after the forum portion of the evening, please go back and enjoy it if you want. If you didn't put your dot in the little question boards, or you didn't give us your mana'o or your thoughts on the post-it notes, please take the time to do so at the end of the evening. And a really big shout out, because I don't think Colton Ching will let me escape this, but we have students from Baldwin High School here tonight. How about a hand for them? I'm just really excited. So Ms. Haley's junior class science students have joined us this evening, and we're looking forward to their questions, hopefully that they'll provide this evening. So I'd like to say that our panelists tonight here, I'm going to introduce each of them and then go straight into the program with a little bit of a video clip sharing with you our forum from last year so you can see what Sharon had mentioned earlier. But our panelists tonight, we're very, very honored that they took the time. They're a bunch of busy people. We made it a point to find 6 of the busiest, most informed folks, and here they are. I think they came for the brownies, and one of them is an alum of Baldwin High, so we're very interested to see how he represents his alum, because as you know, in Hawaii, it's all about what high school you went to. I went to St. Anthony, so I forgive you, us Catholic people. And tonight we are mindful of what we need to do. We're Hawaii, we love to hug, we love to, really do the big things. So I see a lot of you doing the whole shaka, invisible hug, bowing, whatever works, okay? We welcome that. Please don't feel offended if we've changed our greeting methods here this evening or moving forward. So bear with me, I'm really looking forward to introducing our panels, and then we're gonna go into our clip here. we have some really, really established folks. First on our panel is Rebecca Dehav Matsushima. Here, we call her Becca as well. Becca is Hawaiian Electric's Director of Renewable Acquisitions. She joined Hawaiian Electric in 2012, leaving private practice to join our legal department at that time. She holds an MBA and law degree from UH Manoa, and her department of renewable acquisitions leads the way to secure renewable energy producers on 5 islands that our company serves, working in a very critical time as our company faces the largest renewable power procurement in history and helps to fulfill one of the nation's most ambitious goals of bringing less fossil fuels and more renewable energy to Hawaii. So this is Rebecca Dehav Matsushima. And thank you, Becca, for joining us. Michelle McLean next to her, and we're so honored to have join us tonight. She is the county's Director of Planning. You probably see on the news tackling some of our most difficult issues in our community on Molokai and Lanai as well. She earned her bachelor's degree in political science from Vassar College, has been with the County of Maui for over a decade, well over 10 years, still there, one of our most esteemed leaders in the mayor's cabinet. First as Deputy Planning Director, and in 2018, Mayor Victorino appointed Michelle to be our county's planning director. Next to Michelle is Rhiannon Chandler-Iao. Most of us, she may look familiar to you. She has been for many, many years on Maui as the head of Community Workday, also known as Malama Maui Nui, and we share her with Oahu nowadays because upon graduating from the UH Manoa, with her law degree and certificates in both Native Hawaiian rights law and environmental law, she is now with Waiwai Ola Waterkeepers Hawaiian Islands. You can Google them because you'll find that that organization has successfully partnered with many others to improve water quality in Hawaii. In fact, the Waterkeepers that she heads has brought back it's very interesting, a little thing, one of the native shellfish whose populations have declined in our modern day times. This is Hawaiian oysters, back to Pearl Harbor, which is the namesake of the area. So we're very pleased that you could join us. And if you didn't know, Waterkeeper Alliance is a global movement to protect water resources, something that's very important for Maui as well. And they're part of more than 340 Waterkeeper organizations across the world. And she's in charge of Hawaiian Islands. Dick Mayer, he looks really familiar, right? Because Dick is always a part of Maui County in our community. Dick is a former economics and geography professor who taught at what was then known as Maui Community College. I took one of your classes. I survived. He is one of the busiest retirees we know. You see him everywhere in planning commission meetings and public meetings, serving on numerous commissions and boards, including the Kula Community Association, an area that he resides in. He serves as an advisor to many nonprofits, including Maui Tomorrow, and over the years has given generously of his time to our community and attending many meetings and being a member of the advisory groups from for county boards and commissions. He has recognized over time the power of unified effort and in fact helped to lead and start the Maui's Alliance for Community Association, a very critical organization that meets monthly and represents the boards of all community associations across the island. So thank you for being here tonight, Dick. Colton Ching, next to him, is in fact a very proud alum of Baldwin High. I wonder if we should get him sing the alma mater. Although he is a vice president of planning and technology, has been with our company since 2009. He received his engineering degree from UH Manoa. But again, being part of Baldwin is one of the things we're reminded often, and we're always proud of our Maui kids, even though I know he's not a kid, but our Maui folks. In his role with Hawaiian Electric, Colton is responsible for overseeing the areas of advanced planning, system planning, transmission and distribution planning, grid technology, forecasting, and asset management. Tonight, you will hear much more about a very extensive and critically needed effort that Colton and his team leads, and this is called the integrated grid planning process. It's how we're going to lead the way into the future of renewable energy here in our islands. We're going to do a video shortly. Each of these panelists will speak. Chris Reynolds at the very end has joined us. He spoke last year, so he's familiar to many of us. But Chris, who you'll see in our video clip shortly, is Hawaiian Electric's Director of Operational Technology. He's been with our company for 22 years. And with our company, he has served in multiple roles, including Operations Superintendent for Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. And you'll hear a little bit of clip from him in our video. So at this time, we'll go ahead with that.
Hawaiian Electric is on a mission to have our islands powered by 100% renewable energy, get off imported fossil fuel, and reduce our state's carbon footprint that contributes to global climate change. This can't be done alone, recognizing that each of us can play a role in helping to shape what our islands will be in the coming decades. Hawaiian Electric launched a Maui's Renewable Energy Future series to spark discussion on the collaborative efforts needed to achieve a clean energy future. As part of this series, in 2019, Maui's Renewable Energy Future was discussed in the community forum, 100% Renewable Energy, What Will Maui Look Like? In partnership with Maui Tomorrow, the Sierra Club, and Hawaiian Electric, the forum featured panelists from our community who each shared their perspective on working towards a clean energy future for Maui. The dialogue covered what we can expect to see as we move closer to power our island with more renewable resources.
While Maui has made progress towards 100% renewable energy, we still have a lot of work ahead of us. Physically, we'll see more renewable generation across the island, both large, utility-scale, smaller, customer-sited facilities. In the near term, we'll see the retirement of generation from the power plant near the Kahului Harbor. We'll still see power lines above ground, but with the trend to underground lines where we can expect to see less. As we move closer to 100% renewable, we may not notice or see the other changes, such as energy conservation efforts and energy storage systems like batteries and other equipment like StatComs and synchronous condensers to help support the grid.
Different types of renewable resources and energy storage were discussed.
When you're doing solar, you can't put it in shade. So you have to look, where is the aina where you have enough sun to generate solar energy?
Being carbon neutral is not the same thing as being 100% renewable. And there are many ways to get to 100% renewable. We talked about solar, we talked about wind. But one of the things we haven't talked about is how to compensate for when there is no sun or is no wind. We have battery power, there are other technologies which are more large scale, but have so far not been even really investigated on Maui, like pump storage. Pump storage is something that they are looking into on Oahu because they already have reservoirs that they can connect to a system like that.
And the importance of moving towards electrifying transportation was also highlighted.
Ground transportation today accounts for over 1/4 of Hawaii's imported fossil fuel consumption and over 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions associated with the use of those vehicles.
More than 100 attendees came to the event that demonstrated that achieving the ambitious mark of 100% renewables by 2045 will require all of us working together. We've come a long way. Private rooftop and utility-scale solar, biofuel, and wind resources boosted the amount of renewable energy used to generate electricity on Maui County to 41% as of 2019. While this exceeds the state's goal of 30% renewables by 2020, it will take all of us working together to transition our islands towards a comprehensive renewable energy future.
So community involvement is really key, and that's part of the process.
All of us collectively have a responsibility, kuleana, but it's also a burden. And that burden is collectively, how do we come up with ideas? How do we come up with strategies? How do we come up with ways to malama this beautiful place we call home?
So tonight, there we go, thank you. We've asked 5 of our panelists here that were not panelists last year to share their perspective on bringing renewable energy forward for Maui. We're going to hear from Becca, who on the acquiring renewable energy side will give you some insight a little bit. And Michelle McLean from a county policy side, what are some of the opportunities? What are some of the challenges? We're going to have the opportunity to hear from Ray, who's going to share the cultural view of bringing more renewable energy. What are some of the considerations? What can get in the way? What can help us? And of course, community voice. From the perspective of community engagement, will come Dick Mayer, and we'll ask Colton to share his views on how do we integrate everything together, bring everything together and continue forward as we develop this future for Maui. So at this time, we've asked them to offer some perspectives and comments. Then we're going to open the floor to questions and spend as much time as we can answering them on any subject matter that relates to energy and that we can help answer this evening. You'll get instructions for doing it electronically, or if you want a hard copy paper, you can also do that, and then we'll pose your questions to the panelists. Becca?
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm really excited to get to, hear your perspective and see what your questions are as we move towards 100% renewable energy. So, as Mahina and Sharon mentioned, as also mentioned in the video, we have a goal to reach 100% renewable energy in Hawaii by 2045, and that's a goal that the company takes really seriously and we feel is a very important goal for the state of Hawaii. We also recognize as a company that that's not a goal that we're able to reach on our own. That's, I think that sentiment was shared in last year's meeting as well, that this goal is a community goal. It's going to take the utility, the community, our legislators, our policymakers, our government agencies, our landowners. Everybody has to come together, and we all have to work together and find a solution that's going to work for everybody to reach that goal by 2045. This goal is important. It's going to lessen our reliance on imported fossil fuel. So that's great for the environment, but that's also great just for the resiliency and reliability in Hawaii to not be dependent on bringing in fossil fuel from other places. As Mahina mentioned, a large majority of the renewable energy that we use today in Hawaii is purchased by the utility. We don't actually generate that energy ourselves. It comes from what we call independent power producers. So in my role, what my team and I work on is procuring those resources, purchasing that power. So we work with developers who are interested in developing different types of renewable facilities across the 5 islands that we serve. And we take a responsibility to try to do that, in a way that's sustainable, that is good for the community, and so we really look at that as an important goal, and as a responsibility, a stewardship that we have. So in doing that, we want to make sure that the developers are meeting the same requirements and have the same obligations to the community that we feel as the utility that we have. And so we design our procurements with various things in mind. One, we want to make sure that they meet all of our performance standards, that they're engaging the communities themselves, that they're reaching out and doing those things. And so this isn't going to be an easy task. There's a lot of things in Hawaii that we have to take into account. There's limited land availability. There's the availability of materials and shipping. Even things like the coronavirus could affect the ability to get the materials that are needed here in Hawaii to build these facilities. We need to make sure that they're resilient, that if there's storms, we can still serve our needs. So those are a lot of the things that my team takes into account. I think we're running out of time, so I'll pass it on now. But I'm really looking forward to hear your questions about how we procure renewable energy here in Hawaii.
Aloha, good evening, everybody. Because I'm with the planning department, Mahina asked me to talk about permitting. You introduced it as opportunities and challenges, but of course, it's just going to be challenges. When we're talking about land use in Hawaii or in Maui County, there are 4 levels, there are 4 types of state land use regulation. There's agricultural lands, conservation lands, rural lands, and urban lands. And only about 5% of our land is urban or rural. The remainder is about half-half conservation and agriculture. we call agriculture our default designation. It's not that all of that land is suitable for agriculture or is inactive agricultural production, but nonetheless, that's what it's designated. Most of the alternative energy, the commercial alternative energy facilities are located on agricultural land. So there's state regulation of agricultural land and county regulation of agricultural land. And of course, the two of those are not always in sync with each other. The regulations with state agricultural land is based in part on the soil quality rating. If it's highly rated land, you absolutely need a state special permit. And the types of permitting also relate to the size of the facility or the size of the parcel. And that will dictate, the size of it dictates whether it gets handled by the State Land Use Commission or the County Planning Commission. Then in addition to that, you have county regulation, which also depends on the size, but it's a different size than the state regulation. And there's also a requirement that the facility be compatible with existing agriculture. And you need to get a county special use permit, which gets issued by the Planning Commission. And the analysis of those permits does take into account community plans and the Maui Island Plan if it's on the island of Maui. And there's a lot of language in those plans that talk about alternative energy and sustainability and renewables. And so there is a lot of support for those, but then those need to get balanced with the purposes of the agricultural district and promoting and preserving agriculture. So it can be a really tough balance to achieve. And so what it comes down to is just finding the appropriate site in terms of agricultural productivity, and then tying that into the community plan, the Maui Island Plan, and getting community support for it. We know some facilities that have had a lot of support, others that didn't require a permit but had some negative reaction from the community. And I'm sure Dick will be talking about this more, but the community involvement component is going to be really important for these to be supported for the long term. Thank you.
Aloha, everyone, and thank you for spending your evening here with us. Can you hear me? Yay, okay. So I'm so grateful to Hawaiian Electric for hosting this forum. I think it's really important to help us visualize this transition into 100% renewable energy. Our state has taken very bold steps towards our energy future, but what that commitment is going to look like on the ground remains to be seen. The footprint of the existing power generation structure is actually relatively small right now. And so what tonight is about, and what a lot of these challenges that Michelle and others are speaking to, is that the footprint that's going to be required to bring renewable energy to Maui in particular is going to require hundreds of acres of land. And what that process looks like is really what tonight is about. It's about how does the community engage with what is coming. Because some of those acres of land, as we know, are going to maybe contain valuable natural resources or cultural resources, and so that's going to start a big process. And so what really is going to happen is there's going to be a lot of competing interests. It's human nature to say, not in my backyard, or, all of those other terms I think that people use when they want to say, not wastewater treatment facility, no, you can't build this solar, no, you can't build this wind. I mean, this is the future that we're actually headed towards. Certain areas do contain very important cultural properties and natural landscapes, and that's why it's important to have the community involved in this planning process. Thankfully, there are advances in wind technology that might be able to help our native species and our endangered species, but in order to get those new technologies implemented into these plans, the community has to be involved from the beginning. So you're starting out really well by being here today. The next step is telling other people to be involved in this process, following the links that are provided about plans as they continue to roll out. There will be other opportunities to put your voice in, but really we have so much to protect here. As you know, we're the endangered species capital of the world. Our state has public trust responsibilities to those natural resources that are really to be held in the benefit of future generations that aren't even here to talk about the plans that we have today. And so I'm really grateful to Maui Electric for presenting this opportunity for us to have this conversation, and I really just hope that people will continue to stay close to this process. Mahalo. Yes.
Aloha. I'm going to do a little bit of an historical background to all of this. And we're on a trajectory. And I'll go back about 50 years ago to 1970s, when there really were only two elements on Maui, two components of the energy picture. One was Maui Electric and one was the PUC. Everybody else just got their electricity and paid their bill, and that was it, but had no say at all in things. In the 1980s and 90s, many people put solar hot water heaters on their house and were able to cut their electric bill 40 to 50% just by doing that. It was the first dent in the rise of capacity for the company. And then in the 90s and late 90s, early that period of time, there were many hotels built, there were box stores, the big box stores, the timeshares, condos, et cetera, were being built. The population of Maui was growing rapidly. And Maui Electric could only think, we got to increase capacity, we got to build more fossil fuel plants. There were people beginning to say, hey, no, we don't have to, we should go to wind and solar, particularly wind in those days. It didn't happen. And we just kept building more fossil. Then finally, after the year 2000, some things really began changing. Photovoltaics came along, and people began putting them first slowly, and then more and more. First it was homeowners, and then commercial establishments. And then outsiders came in and said, we'll build you a wind farm, we'll build you a utility-grade PV system. And those were established. All of that, was a dent in the increasing desire to burn fossil fuels. Then in 2015, the state said, by 2045, 30 years from now, we're going to be 100% renewable. But they said it only with regard to electricity, not all energy. And we have to remember that when we talk about fossil fuels, we talk about really 5 different things that I'll quickly name. One is the fossil fuel that the utility burns to make electricity. The second one are all the liquid fuels that go into cars and trucks. A third one, which we sort of forget about, is that all that fuel and all the stuff we have on Maui has to be brought here on planes and mostly on ships. And it burns up huge amounts of fuel just to get it here. That's fossil. A fourth one, all the tourists who fly in, visitors who fly here, fly on planes. And without those planes flying on liquid fossil fuels, Maui's tourism is dead. This community goes back to the Stone Age. And finally, the fifth one, all the goods and services, our chairs, tables, everything else here is also made with fossil fuels somewhere. So what should MECO do? Make clear to the public, not just the PUC, how much they will wean their company technically and financially. We have a lot of power plants. What's going to happen if we switch over to all the existing fossil fuel plants that we have on the island? They need to be transparent in conducting their reviews of non-fossil fuels so we can compare solar versus wind versus locating here, locating there. Number 3, initiate a more aggressive program to help homeowners, businesses, and the state and Maui County government to wisely and efficiently reduce their electricity demand. That's the demand side. So far, the panelists and the program here was mainly talking about producing electricity. What we need to do is, one way of getting to 100% is if you cut down demand, there won't be as much need for wind and solar. That's the way of getting towards 100%. The PUC must open up its hearings. PUC meets in Honolulu. Nobody in Maui knows what they're doing over there. They have dockets, they have meetings, and everything else. We do not know what's going on. And what I would lastly like to ask is that the company begin looking at 4 things, and I'm going to do it quickly. One is do a careful analysis of where electricity is being used now on the island. In homes, in businesses, for heating, for lighting, for whatever, so we can attack each of those areas separately and clearly and efficiently to cut down demand. We need to help those who cannot help themselves. That's an important part of our community. We have many people who are less educated, and I don't mean that they're stupid, they just don't necessarily have the background to understand electricity issues. They haven't been taught in school science courses or what have you. We need to work with them so that they will know how to make the right decisions. We have people who are renting, where putting a solar panel on a roof is not something they're going to be able to do, or a solar hot water, because they'll be moving away in a year or two, so they will not have, and yet they are paying very high electricity rates. And lastly, small businesses who may need assistance. We need to work much more efficiently on cutting out their demand. And lastly, storage. One of the most complicated things that will be coming up for everybody will be energy storage, and we need to take care of that issue by teaching people and working carefully with people. Is it better to rely on Maui Electric to store the electricity, or should homeowners have their own battery system set up to recharge? And that goes right into the recharging electric vehicles. Electric vehicles will become something on Maui. If we're going to get rid of fossil fuel cars, we will need that, and they will need to have battery storage to take care of them all. And that, of course, still leaves the airplanes and ships, but that's for another day.
Mahina, why did you put me after Dick?
I read your speech.
I know why. It's because you're a St. Anthony graduate, and I'm a Baldwin graduate. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I know that there are a lot of things that you could choose to do on a Thursday evening, and being here listening to me talk is probably not very high on that list, except for the Baldwin students, right? But one thing that I think every single person mentioned before me, including Sharon and Mahina, is that we have this 100% renewable energy goal, right? And we call it a goal, but actually it's a state law, right? So by state law, we're required to meet it. And when I say we mean all of us, right? There's something beautiful in 2015, right, when the RPS law was amended to be at 100% by 2045. And one of the many reasons why it was a great thing is that it really put a stake in the ground and said, let's not debate where we need to be, because there already is so much support for it for a range of reasons. But really where now the discussion is how do we get there, right? What's the path? And for anyone who's hiked or driven or gone anywhere for travels, right, the path you take and the journey that you go on sometimes is actually more important than the destination you're going to actually arrive at. And really, I think everyone today touched a little bit upon that point, that really getting to 100% and the discussion that we're having tonight and the work that we're going to be doing in integrated grid planning is really not about getting to 100%, it's how we best get there. And fundamentally, that is why we're here tonight. We need to transform the electric grid that Dick talked about was very simple and was built for one set of specific reasons. We need to change that electric system to do something completely different. We call it a transformation. And so we need the grid to be very different, right? Very different from what it was and what it has been. We want to make sure that the electric system that we end up building is the electric system that our customers want and need, that is going to provide the functionality and the service that you're going to actually use. That when you have a set of options to make in terms of how you interact with your electric system, with your own rooftop solar system or your battery or electric vehicle, whatever it may be, you want to make sure as a customer of Hawaiian Electric, you want to make sure that we have an option and the grid will work in a way that you want it to do it, right? So we can't figure out what that electric system needs to be, what kind of resources we should be adding, whether it's wind or solar or whatever it may be to get us there, if we don't talk to you as customers of Hawaiian Electric, right? And so we use the term integrated grid planning because we're integrating our analysis around our generation options and the wire side, right? Our distribution lines and our substations and our transmission lines. But it's also integrated in the basis that we're integrating from the very beginning and throughout the process an interaction with our customers and stakeholders. So we've been working very hard for almost a year with a set of stakeholders, helping us develop a set of assumptions. And we're meeting with all of the communities on all of the islands, the major islands at least, that we serve, including tonight in Kahului, because we want to hear from you, your thoughts about what you want your electric system here on Maui to do. And we're having this meeting before we even begin doing the fun modeling and analysis that us engineers just love to do. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mahina.
We are going to put up the SIFLI login information. And what we like to do is pose different questions to our panelists. We ask each of them to come. They have a different background, different perspective, a very interesting mix of views. There is a high interest for questions and input. But I will want to advise you that if you want a written form, we can do that too. Just raise your hand, and Shayna there, our communications manager, will hand one to you. We'll do it the old-fashioned way. If you have a question specific for one of the panelists, please write their name first, and then we can address that to them as well here. So I got some early questions, and one of them is for, let's see, Becca here. Becca, a question that I received early on is, what are the requirements that the utility is doing for community engagement? How are you ensuring that the community voice is heard? And for the audience to know, what Colton said is important. This forum tonight is one of 4. They've actually been traveling around the state, held one just a few nights ago on Oahu, Hilo, Kona, and now here on Maui. So we're very, very happy with that effort. So Becca, the question, if you have a response for that?
Sure. So maybe I can break it up into 2 parts quickly. We have some ongoing solicitations for renewable energy projects, and for those projects, we've really increased the requirements for developers and what we expect to see from developers for community engagement when they're going out to look at building new projects. So when they submit a project for us to evaluate and determine if they'll be selected, one of the things that we're evaluating is their community plan. So we're looking for developers to submit an actual community plan that hits various criteria that we've laid out for them. So we are actually evaluating that community plan as part of the evaluation that goes into their scoring. Then we actually ask any developer that finally gets selected to publicly, moving forward, they'll be required to publicly post their community plans on their websites, and we'll link to those from our own Hawaiian Electric websites so that the community can find those for easy access. All the developers are also required to hold, at a minimum, 1 community meeting, though we encourage them to do much more than that. That's just a very minimum requirement. And then to engage with the community throughout the project. You know, it's really Hawaiian Electric's view that it's not sufficient to come in and have a community meeting and then build your project. And once we select you as a developer, we look at you as now a member of that community, and we expect you to act in that way, just as we see ourselves as a member of the community. In the IGP process, this is really where a further step. So now we're looking to get community feedback early in the process, before we're even designing our next procurement, to see what it is the community is looking for. What do you value? Do you think there need to be further improvements to the process? And so that we can, as the utility, integrate even more of that into our future solicitation. So that's, from the utility's perspective, these meetings that we've been having the last 2 weeks are part of that, and they'll be, we welcome any further, comments even after tonight as we help shape that process.
Good, thank you, Becca. Here's another question that's coming in through our SIFLI. How does renewable energy benefit Hawaiian Electric, the community, and the environment? So I'm going to actually pass that over to, let's see, who can help with that one? Actually, Ray, how do you see renewable energy benefiting the community and environment?
Sure, absolutely. Well, so we're in climate change, sadly. That's a reality. And I think it's really great that someone pointed out that this is a law and not a goal. So we have to move forward in this way. It's going to help our environment because to the extent that we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, we're going to reduce greenhouse gases. But I think we could be even more creative about how it helps our environment, and even the renewable energy implementation could be more beneficial to the environment than even certain existing conditions we might have. Depends on what the project looks like, but we have tons of things happening in our environment like erosion and agricultural practices that sometimes aren't very good. So even if we're replacing ag lands with solar or wind, if we can use environmentally friendly versions of those, which really it's incumbent upon the community to become involved in the process in order to see that. I think that we can achieve even greater environmental benefits through this project.
Thank you, Ray. This message is for Chris Reynolds. We brought him along to ask the Maui operational questions. So, Chris, as far as Maui, what are we doing to help Maui Electric remain reliable as we transition to renewable energy?
So basically, everything we've been doing before renewable energies came on the scene, we continue doing infrastructure upgrades. We're still doing pole line replacements, underground cable replacements. So that work never stopped. So we're just continually upgrading. We're actually putting in more advanced protection systems. We have a more advanced energy management system. So all that kind of gives us a quick look at the system and know how to react to outages and actually how to prevent outages as well. With the renewable energies coming in, we've had challenges. This is a new generation type for us because it's as available. It's only there when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. So we've adopted and made changes to our generating units to help react quickly and accept more renewable energy just to maintain the reliability.
Very good, thank you. This next question is for Colton. You talk about 100% renewable energy. Do you also mean 100% carbon free? And if not, why?
Whoever asked the question, it's a really good one. And I was asked a similar question on Tuesday, actually, on Oahu. So just for everyone's sake, there is a difference. And really the difference between the two comes down to that not all renewable technologies are carbon free or carbon neutral. And you may ask, well, then why do we have a state renewable portfolio standard, right? And the reason for that, I would say, comes from sort of the origins of the RPS. And if you stop and think about all of the articles around RPS and a lot of the drivers for it, and I think, Becca, you kind of touched upon this. The Renewable Portfolio Standard was started as a means to reduce the use of fossil fuels in the state of Hawaii, right? We're in the middle of the Pacific. Fossil fuels require, to be shipped here, requires a very, very long and risky supply chain. Right now it's about 6,000 miles for the crude oil to first goes to Oahu, gets refined, and then gets put on another ship and brought over here to Maui. And the state recognized that for that reason, for environmental reasons, fossil fuels was something that we wanted to reduce. And as Dick talked about, we wanted to reduce it not just for the electricity sector, although we were kind of the first. It really needs to be reduced in as many sectors as possible. And that's really has been the driver for the establishment of the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So they were looking for technologies that were defined as renewable eligible systems that would reduce the use of fossil fuels. And we've made a lot of progress as a state in the use of fossil fuels to the point now where the electricity sector is significantly less of a component of the fossil fuel use in the state, where now transportation has not had a similar decline, and in fact, fossil fuel use in the transportation sector has actually gone up over the last 12 years. That doesn't mean, though, that every single renewable technology is carbon-free, right? And when you look at Europe, and you look at Asia, and some of the mainland states, their focus is on decarbonization. And decarbonization has gained a lot of attention because it's really it's one of the greenhouse gases that contributes to climate change. And if anyone knows and worries about climate change, it's all of us that live in an island state. But there is a difference. So I'll give you a good example. When HCNS was still in production and it would burn bagasse to produce electricity, as well as to support the sugarcane operations, the electricity produced from bagasse counted towards the Renewable Portfolio Standard. Biomass generators like HNS counts towards the RPS. But it is an emitter, at least at the stack, an emitter of carbon emissions. Right now, the state's law and policy is focused around renewable portfolio standards. But every year, including this year, up at the legislature, there's a series of bills introduced to consider a move away from an RPS and fossil fuel reduction policy more towards a carbon reduction and carbon neutral. But again, it's a state law, and it is the basis for which we're doing a lot of our work, but we're very mindful of the carbon emissions that we do as well, because in addition to the RPS law, there actually is a greenhouse gas law that's in place as statute, but not in place as a, okay, I'm not a lawyer. There's a law, but it's not in, I'm sorry, there's a law, but it's not in the statutes yet. So there's no program in place. No, there's actually a law, but there's no mechanism in place for the DOH to implement it. Sorry, the word will come to me soon.
So the question is, do we have plans relative to that, that's carbon free?
Yeah, so for in terms of the greenhouse gas, it's all greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide, but under the state law for greenhouse gas reductions, we, although it's not in effect yet, we've effectively are meeting that goal with our work on renewable energy, even if not every single renewable resource is completely carbon neutral. So there's a lot of overlap and compatibility with the two. One area, and this may be where some of you folks may be wondering, the one area where carbon reductions becomes a very significant topic is electrification of transportation, electric vehicles, right? Because if we're going to use power from an electric system to charge electric vehicles or to produce hydrogen for fuel cell vehicles, then that increases the amount of electricity produced, now also for electric vehicles, but then that raises the requirements for an RPS. And under the state law, the way it's segmented, if we charge more electric vehicles with the same amount of renewable energy, our RPS goes down, even though it's actually benefiting a different sector.
Thank you, Colton. Good segue to the next question from Michelle. Does the County of Maui Planning Department incorporate electric buses or vehicles in its fleet planning or community planning?
The planning department isn't responsible for the county fleet, so I can punt that question. But in terms of community plans, I mentioned the Maui Island plan that was adopted in 2012, and it does have some strong policy language and some implementing actions related to renewables. The community plans, with the exception of the Molokai and Lanai that were relatively recently adopted, we're working on West Maui right now. The other Maui Island community plans are quite dated, and that really wasn't a predominant concern back when those were adopted in the 80s and the 90s. The most current one was Electric-Kahului, and that was adopted in 2002, I think, so quite some time ago. But with the West Maui community plan that we're working on now, there is an entire section on resiliency, and it very much so. It's not specific to electric vehicles. It's really across the board. So that plan still needs to make its way through the process, but I would imagine that kind of language will stay in.
Good, thank you. This question is for, what happened to it? For Becca. Does the utility work with other state departments to coordinate movement to 100% RPS? If so, which departments would those be?
Sure. We obviously we work very closely with the state Public Utilities Commission. So everything that we do as a utility requires the approval of the Public Utilities Commission, and so all of our drafts, when we're going out to try to find renewable energy, the solicitation documents that we use, the Public Utilities Commission approves those. When we actually select a project, those go back before the Public Utilities Commission, and they have to approve the actual final project in the contract. And the consumer advocate who's here today, he's heavily involved in that process as well, representing the customer in those dockets and making sure that the customer voice is heard when we're deciding whether or not the project is the right project. So we also work with state legislature on policies, and we have an active role there. We work with various county agencies as well. So it's, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's really a statewide, it's going to take everyone in the state to make this happen. So we do work closely with a lot of different agencies in order to do that.
Thank you, Becca. Next question is for Raynon. With all the trade-offs for water resources and land, the limitations of land, how can the Native Hawaiian values coexist with the move towards renewable energy?
That's a really wonderful question, and actually, it speaks to something that I wanted to say so much in the beginning, but really we don't have that much time today. Natural resources are actually cultural resources too, right? And so in this process, when we're talking about developing hundreds of acres of land and we have to cite certain projects, there are going to be areas that are more appropriate than other areas. There are areas that are known to be traditional cultural landscapes and areas that have resources that are unique. And so when you talk about the survival of a culture, that culture depends on the elements that it was created with, that it evolved from. And so those are the natural elements of the environment, plants and animals. They exist in forests, in wetlands, in certain areas that on Maui are very finite. And so that's why when you're going to cite a project, right, and you're going to take a certain maybe approach to it, and I'm so grateful that Michelle is here, because this is where the rubber meets the road. It's actually in the planning department. And as someone said earlier, Hawaiian Electric is not so much in the creation of the power. They buy the power. Somebody else is generating the power, which means someone else owns or operates a solar farm or a wind farm. And in order to get that project in the ground, that's when we are important, the community. When that project is going to get built, when it's going to go into the community plans, when it has its hearings, those things happen independent from Maui Electric or Hawaiian Electric. They don't have control over those processes. That's where in our county government, in the state government, and in the power of the people, we have to guide the development of all the assets that are important to this integrated grid planning system, because really, if we don't have these natural resources, then the foundation of the Hawaiian culture and the practices that depend on them are not going to be able to continue. So there will be very hard choices, and I don't like that it means somebody loses. You know, I mean, it's really a lot of times it's a hard situation, but I think now we're at sort of pushed against the wall where, as a planet, we have to make these big decisions. They're probably not going to be choices we would make if we didn't have to switch over to something that's not fossil fuel. So they're going to be unfortunate compromises, but I think there also needs to be very real involvement from the community to prioritize areas to say, this is not an appropriate area. And when there are areas that are not appropriate, then we move to a different area and we look at that place.
Good, thank you. This question is for Dick Baer. You mentioned that historically it's been a slow move forward, but in the future things look like they're accelerating. How can the community stay involved?
Thank you. Things took time. Many changes happened. I mentioned the various types of solar and other things happening. In the future, I would hope that we would get much more involvement. Somebody mentioned the consumer advocate is here in the room. That office is in Honolulu, supposedly protecting consumers. But it's never been made an appearance here on Maui to hold a public hearing, to take input from the public. And so what I would ask the consumer advocate, whoever you are, and I don't know you, this is not directed to you personally, but the office should be here and should be talking to customers here on Maui, talking to community groups on Maui, what can be done to change the relationship right now between the utility, essentially, and the PUC. Because what we need is a different financial model. We need to cut down the costs, not only for the utility, but also for the consumers and for the businesses and for county government in generating electricity, using electricity. What is the best thing that can happen in that regard? And so I would ask that we have a much stronger tool available. It goes into the county planning department. When the county planning department reviews a project, much more needs to be asked about siting. Is this a good location? Is it going to be near a power line? Is it going to be utilizing non-renewable fuel, non-renewable electricity? All of those questions need to be asked by all the entities in the community. Will it be near a bus route that will allow for bus transportation as opposed to everybody in the community depending on a car? Can we integrate our bus system on Maui? We have school buses, we have tourist buses, and we have Maui's own bus. Is there some way to integrate all of them so that when the school bus is finished delivering kids to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, during the daytime, it could be taking tourists back and forth from the airport or other types of things. These are just ideas. I'm not sure all of them work, but what we need to begin thinking about is how do we solve the use of fossil fuels on this island? Rent-a-cars, for example. I think rent-a-cars, we have lots of them on Maui has more rent-a-cars than Oahu does. That sometimes comes as a shock, but we have more rent-a-cars than Oahu does. What we should do is get an ordinance passed that says the rent-a-cars on Maui every year must increase the percentage of those cars that are electric. 10%, next year 15%, 20%, 25%, 40%, 100%. So that trend becomes part of law. The companies will know in advance. They usually buy their cars, keep them 2 or 3 years, and then sell them off and buy new ones. So they're in a position. It's not like a homeowner which buys a car, may keep it 8, 10, 12, 15 years or more. So the rent-a-cars would be a great place to start. The same thing with bus fleets. They get worn out after a period of time. They should be going all electric. We need storage charging stations, and maybe finding some company that wants to go into business. Just like we have gas stations which go into business selling gas, we could have charging stations operated by private companies located out there and figure out the best way for them to get their electricity. One of the things that's not allowed in our electrical system right now in this state is something called wheeling. So if let's say Maui County as a government, and this is where the planning department could take initiative, says we're going to locate a well here to pump water for our water system or pump our sewage or whatever, they should be able to go someplace on this island and put up their own solar farm or wind farm, and then what's called wheeling, send that electricity through the grid, the power line grid on the island, to the site, and be able to cut down a lot of the costs of transporting that electricity and operate much more efficiently. There are numerous ideas out there that would allow us to make some very effective transitions over the next years. And I would hope that Maui Electric will be a part of that. Even changing the name, I just said Maui Electric. It's no longer Maui Electric. It's Hawaiian Electric, which to me is a step backwards. Because I want the decisions being made on Maui, not in some 25-story building or whatever the height of that building is in Honolulu, where they're making buildings isolated from the people and residents of Maui. So I think what we need to do is change a lot of things in the process so we get decisions made by Maui people on behalf of Maui people, not abstractly in a city like Honolulu, which is so very, very different from where we are.
Thank you, Dick. I'm going to sum that up as saying that you want the community to get involved with any of those initiatives, correct? Yes or no? Okay.
The community does not know many of the technical aspects. So there needs to be a partnership between the community and the utility, which has the technical expertise, and the public, which may have the dollars to have to pay for all that technical.
Very good. And I'm happy to say our president of Hawaiian Electric for Maui County remains a Maui resident. And as you know, many of our leadership are here on Maui. And we're very vocal, as most Maui people are. I do want to let the panelists know we have over a couple of dozen questions that have been pouring in. So I will ask that you address it as concisely as possible. And this next one is for Colton. Colton, it says, what does grid modernization look like in the next 5 or 10 years?
Okay, so if you haven't had a chance to speak with Jason and Amanda, they're the leads for Hawaiian Electric in implementing our grid modernization work. But our grid modernization comes down to a very unique, very different from other utilities approach to modernizing our grid, because it's really first built around transforming our distribution system, those lines either underground or overhead in each of our neighborhoods, to really change its role from distributing power to your homes to one where it is the largest collector of generation on the island, which is all of your rooftop solar systems, batteries, and other these new technologies that are coming online. And to make that grid designed for one-way power flow to now work in 2 ways, right? Flowing back into the grid during the day, mostly, and then continue to operate in its traditional role at night, and to do it in a way that allows more of these rooftop solar and battery systems to be added into your neighborhood and still keep the lights on, still have that reliable power that the question to Chris was all about. That includes the adoption of some really, really new technologies in which we've actually are leading the utility industry in adopting things to control the flow, the levels of voltages on our lines, because when we plug something in the outlet, we really want it to be at 120 volts and not 200 or 100, and to really see what's actually happening. There's actually, on a traditional grid, there's very little visibility, very little information on actually what's happening on the grid, on the electric lines in front of your homes. And this gives visibility to the operators so that they can make adjustments and changes to make that happen reliably during the daytime when there's a lot of solar, and nighttime when there isn't.
Good, thank you. Chris, this is for you. It's a good continuation from what Colton's answer is. We must start with the end in mind. So how, who, and where will the inoperable systems be disposed of? Are there systems that will be reusable? Current systems?
Well, I think that's just part of the natural evolution of the business. We as a business need to change. So there will be company assets that will no longer be of value. Their useful life has come and gone, and they will be retired. Same thing with even the small components, poles, lines, transformers. Even we're looking at diesel generators. At some point, they are going to become obsolete, and we're going to have to transition to a new technology to help meet our customer needs.
Thank you. This is a question from Michelle. What is the county doing to reduce steps to get building permits and incentivize construction companies committed to meet 100% renewable energy goals?
Wow, that's a great question, and I honestly don't know that there is a particular directive to prioritize for those kinds of permits and those kinds of projects. Affordable housing is the big issue, and there is not just a policy, but there is an ordinance about prioritizing building permits and other permits for affordable housing projects. But I'm not aware that the same kind of directive, and certainly not a law requiring that for renewables.
Okay, good, thank you. Question for Colton. Are batteries the only energy storage solution?
Batteries are not the only energy storage solution. Dick actually talked about really the first one that was used commercially, and that's solar hot water heating, where effectively energy is stored in the form of hot water. So there are many, and I think a lot of them we kind of overlook. Batteries today is sort of the sexy technology. It gets a lot of press. And I think there's some good reasons for it, right? Its properties make it very, very well suited for some functions that we're looking storage to do, especially to respond very quickly when things change. When something happens on the grid and it needs to be a rebalance, batteries can provide a response faster than any other technology out there. That's what makes the Tesla so darn fast. And that's great, but it only lasts for a while, right? And so we got to look at other technologies that can provide storage over a longer period of time. And just, if I can, Mahina, providing storage over a longer period of time is one of the things we identified when we did our power supply improvement plan a couple of years ago, to look at how do we get to 100%. Living in Hawaii, we may forget that there are actually seasons. But January and February of most years are the times in the year where both solar production and wind production is at their lowest. And so when we looked at this issue, we saw that if we built an electric system with a lot of solar and wind, which is probably likely to be a big part of our system in the future, it's already here today, then we can size it for March through December. But what happens in January and February is that there's not enough storage technically feasible today that you can build that can collect any extra energy produced from March to December for you to use in January and February. Absent a longer term storage means that you're going to need to add even more solar and more wind to give you enough power in the January and February timeframe. But guess what? That means you have an overbuilt system from March to December, which may not be bad, but it all comes at a price. And that's where the value of some other technologies, maybe it doesn't exist today yet. We're actually part of a DOE study to look at, multi-hour, multi-day storage, because they want to look at what the needs are on our islands. To look at storage that can do 1 week, 1 month. And it's probably not going to be a battery technology, at least today. But they're looking at other forms and other technologies to get it. But it's going to be a very critical need that we're going to need to have on our systems, I think. And batteries today are not going to be able to meet that requirement.
Thank you. Sure, briefly.
Electric vehicles are a form of battery that could be utilized and would be available and integrated into the electric grid system, may become an excellent source. But when I mentioned before about consumer demand, we're only talking about production of electricity. Well, we also can look at how can we get people to reduce demand in December and January. What can be done to get people to use electricity during the daytime when there is a little bit more rather than at night? So you change the rates that people are charged for electricity, more expensive at night than it is during the day. Those are all the things, and there are many others. But I think what we need to look at is take a look at the big picture and not just say we have to rely on a particular physical piece of technology. It might be pricing, it might be consumer demand, time of day, all those kind of issues that are out there, auto batteries, et cetera, in electric vehicles. All of that might be a solution that we could utilize. And there are buildings which are vacant, let's say on a weekend, a weekend like a school, for example. They could have photovoltaics and other material on their roofs that stores energy during the weekend that can be used during the week. A number of things that can be done. Many public buildings are of that kind that close on the weekends. So what we need to do is look at the big picture rather than just saying, oh, we have to get either a battery run by the utility or we can't do it.
Good. Thank you, Dick. For Becca, when is the Stage 2 request for proposals expected to be released?
The stage 2 request for proposals is actually currently ongoing. So we accepted proposals at the end of last year, and we've been evaluating those proposals. We expect to make announcements for the winning projects in mid-May of this year. So coming up very shortly.
Great, thank you. For Colton, will the new integrated grid system, this author wrote IGS, allow for grid-scale solar projects to connect to the grid at their location, or will transmission lines to Maui Electric be needed?
I hope I'm interpreting the question correctly. Grid-scale solar systems, or even grid-scale wind systems and other technologies, when they're large like that, they need to connect at a higher voltage system. And usually that means our transmission system here on Maui. Through the work since the 2000s, adding the 3 wind farms, now the projects coming out of stage 1 and the projects that we're evaluating in the stage 2, we're adding, hundreds of megawatts from a capacity standpoint of power systems to our grid at our transmission level. And we're really getting to the point where developers are very good at trying to figure out where to site their projects, not just from a community perspective, but from a grid connection perspective as well. And so we're really taking advantage of whatever remaining capacity we have on our transmission to connect these large systems with either little or fairly modest amounts of transmission to make that connection. But ultimately, it needs to connect. Right? It needs to connect to the transmission system because we need to take that power from that solar farm in this question and actually get it to all of you. And we need to do it through that transmission system.
Thank you. I think Chris can answer this one. Whatever happened to wave energy? Colton? What is the current one? The question is, whatever happened to wave energy?
Wave energy continues to be a technology that a lot of folks continue to look at. It's still in a pre-commercial stage at the moment, sort of like how wind was back in the 70s and early 80s. There are many countries and many companies out there looking at different ways to use and harness the energy in waves to produce electricity. Some of them use compressed air, some of them have big snakes, all kinds of variants. One of the latest systems for wave energy was just built in San Diego and then shipped to Honolulu, where we, in conjunction with the Marines of all folks, have a test facility located off the coast of my home, off of Kaneohe. And that uses yet another sort of physical design to produce electricity off of wave power. And when it got here, it broke down. And it's big. But it has a promising technology, right? I share that example with you just to illustrate that wave energy, if man is successful, or women are successful in making that technology work to produce electricity and do it, cost effectively and reliably, I think we all know that there's an enormous amount of energy potential out there. But right now, the state of technology really doesn't have the kind of scale of systems at prices that any of us would want to pay to effectively capture that energy and produce electricity.
Good, thank you. Becca, this is about community solar. What is the status of community solar in Hawaii? Becca or Colton?
Take a stab at this one, but there might be other people in the room even more qualified than me to answer this. But we do have our first phase of community solar is open. There have been projects that have signed up for that. None of them are yet in operation, but there are projects that are signed up. So we're looking to get those moving hopefully soon. And then before the commission, there is a.
Explain what it is. Community solar.
Oh, sure. Sure. So community solar is large, or larger than rooftop in most cases, but not like a large utility scale project. And it is a solar project that would allow maybe people that rent their homes or that live in condos or just maybe don't live in an area where there's a good sun resource to have their own solar panels, they can basically buy into this community solar program, and then they'll receive a credit on their energy bill as if they had rooftop solar on their own roofs. So it's a way that the community, it's another option for the community to participate in renewable energy if they don't have that own option on their, for themselves. And there is a phase 2 of that project, which we've proposed to really increase the scale of that project. And that's currently pending before the State of Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. So we're waiting to see for an order on that, and then we'll move forward with the phase 2.
Good. So I call community solar rooftop solar without the roof. Because it gives customers much of the benefit of having rooftop solar without having to have that solar system right on their own roof, right? So if you don't have a roof, if you live in a condo or you rent a home or share a home, you can get much of that benefit by participating in a community solar program, which is generally the idea, as Becca said, of perhaps a larger system located somewhere else in the island. Again, it doesn't have to be where you live, but where you buy into a portion of that solar farm and effectively get the value and credit of that portion. It's great. So if you planning to move, or like for me, where my home is, I swear I have shade 24 hours a day at my home. It may be a better option. And so we really like the idea. As Becca mentioned, there's a small first phase that's underway. All of these systems, the solar systems by which customers can purchase a portion or credit, are done by third parties. And we're really pushing for a larger phase so that we can give that opportunity to more of our customers.
For Raynon. Do you feel that Hawaii's environmental laws are prepared to meet the coming of large-scale renewable energy projects?
That's another excellent question. Sadly, I think Hawaii has some of the greatest environmental laws. We just don't comply with them a lot, which is sad. So I think that our laws definitely are ready to meet the needs of the project, and especially because technology has come so much further than it ever has been in the past. I think the infrastructure is a lot more environmentally friendly now. And I think also that this probably the way that the law interacts with this process the most importantly is in the community engagement processes that are required for environmental impact statements and environmental assessments. And so I would say if there are any public engagement opportunities that become available to this community as any of these individual projects get built, and really this is like a puzzle, right? Like we can't, there's not going to be official notice that today the grid is starting or any other way. I mean, it's a problem for the planning department since the beginning of time. I was on the Cultural Resources Commission, and I swear that the way that the public is made aware of a project is when the bulldozer starts running. But by the time the bulldozer is running, it is way too late to do anything about anything that's happening. And so the public engagement process, many of those are mandatory law-driven processes with regard to the environmental impact statements and EAs that will undoubtedly be required. I think the opportunity is there for us to engage. We just have to do it.
Good, thank you. For Colton, what is the utility doing to accelerate electrification of transportation?
Great question. We're doing quite a bit. One of the things that we're doing is working with many others to really increase the awareness of the value of electrifying the transportation sector. That's number one. And I think our panelists today demonstrate that that's actually working pretty well, not just because of us, but by really a coalition of folks who really see this as a really important change that we need to have. That's number one. Number two, we want to make sure that when someone is contemplating the purchase or lease of an electric vehicle, that concern of not having the ability to charge or running out of a charge while they're on a trip is not going to be a barrier to them, right? That range anxiety and concern is, through our past work, is one of the biggest factors that prevent someone from getting an electric vehicle. And there is a market out there of many different folks who have, over the course of the years, installed chargers at different locations. Maui is probably the poster child of that through the Jumpstart program, where Maui had a very high distribution of charging systems. But typically commercial charging stations are located where those folks who are investing in the chargers believe they can get the most revenue from those chargers, that not necessarily putting them in places that can kind of fill the gaps to deal with someone who's doing a drive and can ensure they get a charge in the right place. So that's where we see that we can have one big role. And so we asked for and got approval from a Public Utilities Commission to install up to 25 fast chargers across all of the islands that we serve, and we're trying to locate them in places where having that charger there can really help someone who's doing any kind of drive and not run out of a charge. The other really important role we see that we're working on is what's called creating make-ready infrastructure. So when you see a charger like a Kahumanu shopping center, and you see that the charger on the pedestal and the screen and the cord, you're only seeing a part of that charging infrastructure, right? There's a lot of electrical infrastructure built underground in conduits to get the power from wherever to where that charger is located. And oftentimes, the cost of that is more expensive than the charger itself. And the time that it takes to build that, getting through all of the state and local codes and permits to do it, can often make or break someone's decision to put in a charger. So we want to be the ones to help build that make-ready infrastructure, so when someone wants to put their own charger in there, that they can do so quickly and they can do so affordably. Because the more chargers that there are out there, that helps get a higher electric vehicle adoption.
Thank you, Colton. For Becca, with solar and photovoltaic panels looking like to be the lead renewable energy source for meeting the RPS goal, if so, or if that is so, how will we eventually dispose of the panels? And is that a consideration as we put out a request for proposals for projects?
Right now, we've been adding a lot of solar projects. I don't know if it will be the lead. We definitely won't get to 2045 solely on solar. We need more what we would call firm type resources that are available 24 hours a day. So I think our current focus has been on solar, but that won't be our only focus. But we do take into consideration the solar panels and what will happen to them. We have requirements in our contracts for developers to dispose of their projects at the end of the term responsibly. And there's also a bill currently before the legislature this session. I'm not sure if it's still going through, but there was one at least at the beginning of the session dealing with the recyclability of solar panels.
One more thing to add to that. Okay, one more thing to add to it. It's a great question that was asked of Becca, but I want to just point out that the stage 1 projects in total across Oahu, Big Island, and Maui represents about 260 or so, maybe a little bit off in memory, megawatts worth of PV panels. We have over 900 megawatts worth of PV panels on our customer roofs. So the question about proper disposal has to be thought from the perspective of all the panels, not just those from these large systems, but those panels that are on many of our homes, 1/3 of our homes too.
Thank you, Colton. We are going to wrap up with one last question, or maybe two, depending on how long, so that we can honor our scheduled time. Certainly, questions that were not answered will be compiled, and we will be hosting them on our website as well under the Integrated Grid Planning page, so that you can see the answers, since there are no authors connected to these. This is for Becca. How do renewable energy projects that do not fit in a traditional request for a proposal apply?
That's actually a really good question, and something that we're looking at right now in the integrated grid planning process. So we, as Colton mentioned, have been meeting with various stakeholders over the course of a year, and we're continuing those meetings. And one of the things that we're looking at is the competitive procurement process, and how does that work, and how can we account for projects that may have a longer lead time. You know, they may take longer to develop than a solar project or a wind project, or and how can we tie that into the procurement process? So we are looking right now at projects that maybe not shovel ready, which is, you know, something that can be built pretty quickly. And we're looking at having a separate stream of procurement moving forward under our integrated grid planning process. So it's not fully defined yet, but it is something that we're working on, and we welcome feedback if the community has ideas on how to further refine that. But we have been accounting for that in our working group meetings and are hoping to find a good solution.
With that in mind, we actually have time for one more question. For Michelle at the county, with the future of renewable energy, is the County of Maui making extra or extended effort in working with the electric company for future planning?
Did you ask that question, Mahina?
Inquiring minds want to know.
Again, I don't know that there's a focused policy in that direction, but I think that you know, given what you folks are tasked with, that's certainly something that you could bring to the mayor and bring to the council to see if something can be codified, or at least get some sort of directive for that, because you're under the gun, right? So it can be done formally, officially, you know, by the adoption of a law, or it can be a directive or a policy instead.
Alex DeRoot, I think he's following us on Facebook, so if you're there, Alex, hi. He's been a very, very active and regular participant as a stakeholder council member in our integrated grid planning process. So he's provided a lot of valuable input from the very first meeting on that. So for the residents of Maui, you know, and the author of that question, I think you can take some comfort that you have folks like Alex that are on the stakeholder council participating and giving their views. Alex actually has been serving in two roles, first as a community member, but now in his new job, overseeing energy.
Thank you. As we wrap up this evening, I just wanted to say that this is the one of many efforts we make to stay connected and stimulate some discussion and dialogue and bring forward any and all to the table. So how about a hand for our panelists here for giving us their time, and to everyone who is tuning in through Akaku and Facebook Live tonight, and those who came. Our staff is waving that we have extra brownies and some food, so we want you in our local style, of course, to not go home empty-handed. I'm going to turn this over to Sharon for just some closing comments, and to mahalo everybody.
Okay, thank you. How about another round of applause to our moderator, Mahina? And please join me in thanking our staff behind the scenes for putting this together. The integrated grid planning team, all those who traveled to help us with the open houses across, what was it, 4 meetings? Yeah. And of course, our panelists, just give them a hand again. But as you could hear from the discussion, and thank you all for participating and asking your questions and sharing very challenging, right, perspectives. I think it was great for us to all hear that early on in this process from the procurement, permitting, culture, environmental, community, and past history, and suggestions from our Dick Muir County Alliance of Community Associations, Colton, of course, Colton and Chris from our utility. But as you could hear, it's going to take all of us. I mean, you saw the different perspectives. And if we continue to just almost work in our silos, it's not going to happen in time, I think, for to make our communities better. So I think we have this grand opportunity through our process to maybe help facilitate and continue these types of discussions and maybe dig down deeper through some of the stakeholder council working groups as well as additional community meetings, because we here on the neighbor islands are very committed to getting your input, because we know that we can't move forward without addressing them, even if we know that not necessarily everyone's going to agree, but we do need to move forward, make decisions, and we really appreciate your input and continued involvement with our process. And thank you to those of you who have participated, via Facebook. Thanks to our tech folks, Akaku, for making it available to those who couldn't even maybe participate or view it tonight, but can view it later. So mahalo, everybody.